Hello, good day. Welcome to our first lesson for Math 13 Engineering Data Analysis. In this video, we will be discussing the first part of the Introduction to Data, which will be our lesson number 1. So let's start. So what is this lesson about? So in this lesson, you will be introduced in the concept of data, the methods of data collection, sampling, introduction to design of experiment, and a short review of basic statistical terminologies which will be used in this course. So the objective of this study is, number one, define common statistical terms. Number two, we will be able to discuss what data is. And finally, identify and differentiate data collection methods. So we'll be focusing first on the first two objectives for this particular video. However, as you may notice in your module, we have already completed all of these objectives in module number 1. So let's start with defining some statistical terms. So statistics is defined as the mathematical science that is concerned with the data collection, the data analysis, data interpretation, and data presentation. So dito sa statistics or sa engineering data analysis in particular, we will be focusing on these 4 activities. So all activities that we'll be doing in this particular course will revolve in one of these particular categories. So either we are collecting the data, then we are analyzing it, or we are interpreting it, and then more importantly, we are to present the data. Kasi sabi nga, the data in itself will be useless unless it is communicated and used for good use. No? So let's continue. We will now look into the branches of statistics. As you may recall, in your high school, we have two major branches of statistics. Number one is the descriptive statistics, which is simply about describing, that's why it's called descriptive, so describing the data collected. It involves organizing and summarizing your data. The second branch of statistics is the inferential statistics. It involves now the analysis and interpretation of your data in order for you to infer a hypothesis. So it's important that when you have the data, after you analyze it, you make a guess, okay? You make a hypothesis or prediction about the population based on the results of your analysis and interpretation. So we will, in this particular course, we will first discuss descriptive statistics, then later on we will be discussing also the inferential statistics. So let's first define what data is. So data are observations such as measurements, gender, survey responses, etc. that have been collected. So the truth is we are surrounded by a lot of data. So whenever you post something in Facebook, you are giving out your data. When you buy something in Shopee, you are giving a data. So everything that we do generates a data because it's simply an observation. Should someone be interested in your data, they can observe you, your actions, etc., your details, so that they can gather your data. Okay? So let's also discuss what population is. Population is simply the complete collection of all elements. Could be scores, people, measurements, so on to be studied. So the collection is complete in the sense that includes all subjects to be studied. For example, if we are to study the Filipino people, we are to include all of the population of the country. So that is 110 million or so. If we are talking about the population, or we are to study the population of Bicol University, we're talking about 17,000 to 20,000 students as members of that particular population. So when you say population, we are considering everyone or everything that is involved in that particular field or study of interest. Next is the census. Census is the collection of data from every member of the population. As you may remember, I think every 10 years, the country is conducting a census in order for us to have a data, the PSA or the Philippine Statistical Authority, for them to have a data of the current standing of the whole population. The sample, however, is a sub-collection of members selected from a population. Look at this particular figure. So for example, if we're talking about Bicol University, so the whole population of Bicol University is your population. If we get a sub-collection of members within that particular population, we call it the sample. Say for example, we chosen at random, say 100 students from Bicol University. That 100 student is your sample size or the sample that represent the whole population of Bicol University. It's very important that we can differentiate these four, no? We should differentiate the concept of population. We should differentiate from the concept of sample. Okay, let's continue. So let's talk about the types of data. So you may be familiar with the two terms called the parameter and the statistic. Remember that this statistic is different from the statistics, the study or the science. Rather, this is the statistics which we commonly hear when we say, give me the statistic so that I can understand. So first, what's the difference? Parameter, you'll notice here, based on the definition, that it is a numerical measurement based on the characteristic of the population. However, statistic is the numerical measurement describing the characteristic of the sample. It's very easy to identify. If the parameter talks about the whole, the numerical measurement talks about the whole population, then it is a parameter. But when it talks about a specific sample, then that numerical measurement is called statistic. The second type of data that we should look into is the difference between quantitative data and qualitative data. So quantitative data consists of a number, remember this, that represent counts or measurement. Okay? So for example, age, so that's a number. For example, height, that is also a number. When you say qualitative data, on the other hand, it can be separated into different categories that distinguish by some non-numeric characteristic. For example, gender, right? Address, things like that. So when you say quantitative data, it talks about numbers. When you say qualitative data, it talks about non-numeric characteristics. We'll look into more on this in the next slide. Okay, so you'll notice in this particular figure that the data can be divided into two, the qualitative and the quantitative, while the quantitative data can be further divided into two, discrete and continuous. So what do we mean by discrete? So the discrete data results when the number of possible values is either a finite number or a countable number. In other words, it's a whole number. That is the number of possible values of 0, 1, or 2, and so on. For example, in your module, you'll see there that the example of discrete data is the number of eggs that a particular hen lays, no? So, hindi naman pwede na mangitlog ang isang manok ng kalahating itlog lang. It's always a whole number. So, it's a countable number. Therefore, it is a discrete data. On the other hand, continuous data is results from the infinitely many possible values that correspond to some continuous scale that covers a range of values without gaps, interruptions, or jump. Example in your module is the gallons of milk. So, hindi naman necessary na ang isang cow will only produce 1 gallon, 2 gallon exactly, no? So, they can produce, say, quarter gallon or 1.235 gallons of milk. So, continuous data is simply a data that is not a whole number, or it could be a whole number, but it can also be a decimal number, and so on and so forth. The next thing that we will look into is that there's another way of classifying the data. it can be classified into four: the nominal, the ordinal, the interval, and the ratio measurements, or the level of measurements. So we will look into them one by one. First is the nominal level of measurement. So it is defined as or characterized by data that consists names, labels, or categories. The data cannot be arranged in an ordering scheme such as low to high because names yun. So hindi siya numerical, therefore it cannot be arranged in order. Okay, so pwede mo siyang i-alphabetize for that matter, but nominal data level cannot be used in measuring things. Next, let's talk about ordinal level of measurement. If they can be arranged in some order, but differences between data values either cannot be determined or are meaningless. So they call the ordinal numbers. So ibig sabihin, dito sa ordinal numbers, you have some level of option to arrange them in some order. For example, sa ranking, ano ba, first honor, second honor, third honor, etc. Those things can be ranked, or can be arranged in some order. However, the difference between the first and the second and the third is not constant, or sometimes it is meaningless. For example, most clean city, Legazpi for example. So hindi siya basta-basta natin ma-measure yung difference between the first price and then the second price. Let's continue. The third one is the interval level of measurement. So the keyword here is the interval because it is like the ordinal, you can arrange them in order, but the difference between any two data values is meaningful. However, data at this level do not have a natural zero, or there's no starting point. Say for example, 3 years. So you'll say, sir, there's a starting point in year. Actually, no, because even we don't know the real start of time. Even at year zero, okay, hindi natin necessarily that is the very beginning of time. So we have, say for example, 25 BC, okay? So that is still existing, but it is no longer after the baseline, which is the birth of Christ. So interval level can be measured yung kanilang differences, but there's no natural zero. Remember that. And finally, we have the ratio level of measurement. So it is the difference between them can be measured, but more importantly, it has a natural zero. In other words, their ratio is meaningful. So sa interval level, the only meaningful item is the difference, pero wala siyang natural zero, so their ratio is not really, it doesn't make sense. But here, in ratio level of measurement, you have a meaningful ratio as well as the meaningful difference. Example, prices, weight, age. So pag sinabi mong zero price, it makes sense as zero. The weight as well as the age. So remember that data should be identified and classified and used correctly in order for it to be useful. So data is the new oil. Remember that, and I hope that we have you have been reminded of the concept of statistics, data, and some properties that we have discussed. In the next video, we will be talking about the sampling techniques by discussing the introduction to design experiment. So thank you. If you have question, post it in our discussion forum. Thank you.